George absolutely held the Walbrechts responsible for the departure of his wife. He took no responsibility himself for the way that he treated her. And on August 2nd, 1912, he decided to take matters in his own hands. He was a drunk that seemed to hate all the world. He tried to be a murderer and became a fugitive who led almost all southern Colorado on a spirited chase. And in the end, the one soul to offer him any kind of absolution, whether he deserved it or not, came from an unexpected place. Welcome to Stories from the Midland. In today's episode, we're digging deeper into George Ballew, would-be killer at the Walbrecht Hotel in South Platte, from our audio episode, The Town of South Platte and Its Namesake Hotel. The town of South Platte, previously known as Signs, was called by the Rocky Mountain News a fashionable retreat. It was serviced by the Colorado and Southern Railroad and visited over the weekends by automobile parties. So extreme violence was the last thing anyone there expected. Now, if you want to go to the old town site today, you can drive north on Highway 67 out of Woodland Park. The highway eventually makes a right turn, so continue straight on what has become North Platte Road. You'll eventually come to the remains of the South Platte Hotel on your left after crossing a bridge, with a hiking trailhead for the North Fork Trail on your right. Behind me here is where the North Fork of the South Platte feeds into the South Platte River. I'm actually standing on a bridge, and as I go over that way on the bridge, I will walk into the town that was once called Signs but became known as South Platte. There is only one building still standing there, and that is the old South Platte Hotel. I wanna go somewhere far away. George Ballew wasn't necessarily known to the people of South Platte. From time to time, he drifted through to buy supplies or to get drunk, but that was really about it. But on the night of Friday, August 2nd, 1912, he became South Platte's most notorious gunman. Charles and Mate Walbrecht were the owners of the Walbrecht Hotel, also known as the South Platte Hotel. They made the hotel bar a welcoming place where people would come in and, among other things, share their lives and problems to be comforted by the pair. George Ballew was a self-employed 29-year-old stage driver who made daily trips between Deckers and South Platte. The previous fall, Ballew married 16-year-old Maria Wolford in New Mexico against her stepfather's wishes. When he brought her to South Platte, he invested $1,500, about $48,000 in 2024 money, in his stage line, and also bought a small home for his new family. But theirs was not a happy marriage. Ballew spent a lot of time drunk and physically and verbally abused his child wife. Maria left Ballew to return to her family in Las Cruces on July 21st, 1912. Now, Ballew already felt he had reason to hate the Walbrechts. Charles Walbrecht was the postmaster for South Platte and had taken the contract for carrying mail away from him, also leaving Ballew owing him money. But even worse, young Maria had befriended the couple and would share her marriage problems with them. And Ballew blamed them for convincing and then assisting her in her departure. From the moment Maria left, Ballew was drunk. He was regularly seen drawing his guns, his pair of Colt .45s, and announcing that each gun held 4 bullets for the Walbrechts and 1 for himself. And at about 7 o'clock on the night of Friday, August 2nd, he decided to act. He burst through the door of the hotel's barroom, his guns in holsters at his waist. When he demanded a beer from Charles Walbrecht, who was tending bar, Walbrecht refused and told him to leave. Ballew responded saying, "So you're too good to sell me some booze, are ya?" And without pausing, pulled one of his revolvers and fired 2 rounds at Walbrecht. One of the bullets grazed Walbrecht's face and he fell to the floor. Thinking he had taken care of Charles Walbrecht, Ballew charged through the barroom into the kitchen where he missed the one shot he took at dining room girl Ethel Caffey. He continued to charge through the kitchen and into the dining room where Mate Walbrecht was sitting with California tourists Mr. and Mrs. Harry Berman, station agent and telegraph operator J.A. Payne, and James McWhorter, who ran a pool hall owned by the manager of the Boston Braves baseball team. Ballew's next shot was at point-blank range at Harry Berman, but Berman was only lightly wounded. Ballew then turned the gun on Mate Walbrecht and fired, wounding her in the left arm that she'd lifted to protect her face. She fell out of his view behind the table, and as Ballew fired several shots at McWhorter, shattering his left elbow and hitting him in his side, she was able to escape out the back door. Ballew chased her out the door and, seeing her crawling in the edge of a field, shot her from behind, leaving a terrible wound in her left thigh. Determined to get help, Payne ran for the telegraph office. As he was trying to connect with Pine Grove, Ballew arrived, pointed a gun at his head, and threatened to blow the hell out of him if he called for assistance or touched his telegraph key. The telegraph operator cowed. He returned to the hotel and lit it on fire with 5 gallons of kerosene. He stood guard laughing madly with glee until the hotel was engulfed in flames, and then he turned to try to finish killing the Walbrechts. But he couldn't find them, so he ran home, saddled one of his stage horses, fired shots into the air, and rode off yelling that he'd be back to finish the job. Mate Walbrecht was found in a field when she was heard faintly calling for help. McWhorter was found a little distance from the hotel where he'd fainted from loss of blood. Payne was convinced to call Pine Grove for a doctor and Sheriff Kinkelf in Littleton and Sheriff Dennis in Golden. From Pine Grove, Nick Cruz jumped on his horse and rode hard for Schaefer's Crossing, about 12 mountainous straight-line miles to the northwest, to fetch Dr. H.B. Forsch. Forsch fought the terrain and arrived in South Platte at about 4 o'clock in the morning. He examined Mrs. Walbrecht and McWhorter and quickly decided they needed to be evacuated to a hospital in Denver. Dr. Forsch helped as best he could with the very limited medical supplies and equipment he had on hand until the special train arrived at 8 o'clock to evacuate the pair under Dr. Forsch's care. While Sheriff Dennis organized a posse and ready to depart Golden, Ballew rode hard for Sedalia. He left his horse behind, sent a telegraph to his family in Tennessee asking them for help, and boarded a train bound for Colorado Springs. Ballew dropped off the train at Breed, about 10 miles north of Colorado Springs, grabbed breakfast from a work train, and then headed south on foot. The workers called in the strange event in the man's description. The information was passed to Sheriff Dennis, who feared that Ballew was headed to New Mexico to kill his child bride and her parents. He alerted law enforcement in southern Colorado and northern New Mexico. While he and his posse made sure Ballew wasn't still between Pine and Golden, posses headed out from several places, including Castle Rock, Colorado Springs, and Cripple Creek. Meanwhile, Ballew took a streetcar through Colorado Springs where he gathered newspaper clippings about himself. He made his way south to Rocky Ford, 10 miles northwest of La Junta, by late on the night of August 3rd, where he stole a horse and buggy. He drove southeast to Omega, where exhausted he lay down on the side of the road to sleep. The owner of the horse and buggy, George Governeau, reported the theft to law enforcement, and Sheriff Porter in La Junta dispatched Under Sheriff John Devine and 2 other deputies, believing they were dealing with a common horse thief. As the undersheriff approached Omega, he saw a man sleeping off the side of the road. Again, thinking that he had a horse thief and not a man on a killing spree, he approached. Ballew woke up, realized law enforcement was approaching, and opened fire. The undersheriff was driven off and forced to return to La Junta for backup. Ballew continued towards La Junta looking for a means of escape when he came upon African-American Wesley Wilson sitting in a buggy. He pulled his gun and demanded Wilson exit the vehicle. But after Wilson jumped out and Ballew climbed in and started driving away, Wilson pulled a gun of his own and shot Ballew in the right side. Ballew continued towards La Junta, but Sheriff Potter, along with deputies F.N. Rose, M.A. Lee, and Charles Stewart, were coming straight at him. When Ballew finally saw them, he turned his buggy around and madly beat his horse to try to speed him away. As Ballew continued his flight, he fired behind him at the pursuing sheriff, but it was no use for him. The men closed in closer and closer, and Ballew decided to stop his buggy, jump from it, and run across the nearby pasture towards a farmer's house. But the wound from Wilson's gun slowed him down, and he was shot a second time by the sheriff's men. When he rounded the house, he cried out, "You'll not get me alive, damn you!" The firefight that ensued was a cautious affair. Both lawman and outlaw carefully fired from behind cover, and it lasted a half an hour. While two of the posse continued to draw fire, two others split off and began to creep around the far side of the house. Ballew seemed to sense what was happening, and with a thick flurry of bullets, ran into the wheat field to hide behind a haystack. The pursuers again split their force to come around both sides of the concealment, and as they crept forward, they heard a single, final gunshot. When they slowly, cautiously rounded the haystack, they found a dead Ballew, one shot in his right hip, one in his right side, and a self-inflicted shot through his right eye. In the end, neither Charles Walbrecht nor Harry Berman was seriously injured. The newspaper claimed that Mate Walbrecht was likely going to die and would regardless have to lose her left arm. Well, while I couldn't find any reporting on what happened to her arm, I did find her alive in the 1920 census, and I also saw that in 1913 she tried to sue for part of Ballew's estate to make up for some of her losses at the hotel. So Ballew didn't succeed in killing her. Now, I couldn't find any additional information on James McWhorter, but I also couldn't find any obituaries or death announcements for him in the time frame in either Colorado or in Boston. As to Ballew's widow, Maria Wolford Ballew returned to Denver in April 1913 to raise enough money to retrieve her husband's remains to take the body home to his family in the Tennessee Hills, Tennessee. George beat her. He cursed her, and he drove her away. He attempted cold-blooded murder, and he was probably on the way to kill her and her parents. I can't imagine the hate and denunciation she faced. But in the end, she had the grace to come to find him to try to take him home for a Christian burial. Thank you for joining me for this episode. This is Tommy Allen wishing you a great day. And should you be having some domestic issues, maybe stay off the sauce. You really don't want to have all the lawmen in southern Colorado coming to look for you. I look forward to having you join me next time for more stories from the Midland. Here we go, one more time. This will be the one. This will be the one. Walbrecht, Walbrecht, my gosh. Ballew's next shot was at point blank range. The pursuers again split their force to come around both sides of the concealment, and as they clapped, I said it again. But I also couldn't find any obituaries or death announcements.